Welcome back to the deep dive. How often do you find yourself, chasing happiness?
It feels like the default state for most of us, doesn't it?
It really does. For me, and I think for a lot of people, happiness isn't this constant state of being. It's more like a moving target, always just a little bit out of reach.
You're always chasing the next thing.
Exactly. We buy the new gadget, we book that epic trip we've been dreaming of, we finally hit some huge goal at work, and for a few days, maybe a week, it's glorious. We feel fantastic.
But then it fades.
It always fades. The glow is gone. And almost immediately, that craving for the next thing, the next dopamine hit kicks right back in. We're just locked in this cycle, this unstable external loop of temporary pleasure and honestly, the pain that comes right after.
And that external chase you're describing, that addiction to the temporary high, that is precisely the central problem that ancient wisdom traditions were built to solve.
So it's not a new problem.
Not at all. And today we're doing a really monumental deep dive into a text that addresses this head on. It's called the Nirāmisasutta. That's SN 36.31 for anyone looking it up.
And what's special about this source?
Well, it doesn't just, philosophize about happiness in vague terms. It offers a precise 3-tiered operational framework. It's like an engineering blueprint for analyzing joy, happiness, equanimity, and finally, liberation. It's a map for internal mastery.
I love that. A blueprint. It gives us such a clear map, and it lays out this path to bliss in 3 sort of ascending tiers: sensual, meditative, and then transcendental.
Right, from the coarse to the incredibly refined.
And that's our mission today. We are going to use that spiritual architecture, that ancient blueprint, as our framework to explore some really cutting-edge neuroscience.
We're talking about neurotransmitters, brain networks.
So specifically, we're focusing on neurotransmitters in the brain's default mode network, the DMN. We want to see exactly how the mind physically makes that transition from that fleeting dopamine-fueled spike of pleasure to a stable, unshakable, transcendent contentment.
We're really looking at the core mechanics here, the how.
The how of internal mastery. We'll focus specifically on how a practice like deep concentration, or Jhāna, can fundamentally rewire the core self-referential parts of the brain to eliminate sensual craving entirely.
That's it. We're bridging the gap between centuries-old spiritual architecture and modern brain chemistry. The central question we're really digging into is this: can we evolve past craving by changing the fundamental wiring of our own identity?
A huge question.
And the Nirāmisasutta gives us these perfect, definitive categories to analyze that whole neurological and psychological shift from total dependence to total freedom.
Okay, let's dive in. Let's unpack the structure. Before we even get to the 3 tiers, we need to establish the foundational language, right? The sutta makes a key distinction between joy, which is pīti, and happiness, which is sukha.
Yes, and that distinction is crucial. They aren't synonyms here.
And then it categorizes these feelings using this prefix, Sāmisa.
Exactly. Understanding the terminology is, it's the price of entry for this whole discussion. Sāmisa literally translates to something like combined by, or my favorite, with bait.
With bait, like there's a hook attached.
That's the perfect metaphor. It refers to any joy or happiness that is conditioned. It's dependent on sensual pleasure. There's a hook attached to it, so it's happiness that relies completely on the external world.
So when the conditions change or the thing you're enjoying disappears,
the happiness goes right with it. It gets reeled back in, leaving you wanting more.
And that distinction between pīti and sukha, I think we often use joy and happiness interchangeably, but here they seem to represent 2 very distinct psychological states.
They're different in quality, absolutely. Pīti is often translated as rapture or zest or kind of thrilling joy. It's an excitatory state.
So it's energetic.
Very. Think of it as that emotional peak. It can even have physical signs like goosebumps or a surging feeling of energy in the body. It's bubbly, almost turbulent.
Okay, so if that's pīti, what's sukha?
Sukha it's deeper. It's stable contentment, a profound sense of well-being or ease. It's a state of deep relief and profound calm. It's much more settled.
I see. So pīti is the excitement, the thrill of the moment, and sukha is the resulting stability and peace that follows. It's the difference between the exhilaration of winning a race, that's the pīti.
Right, the adrenaline rush.
And the lasting, quiet satisfaction of knowing you train consistently and well for months, that's the sukha.
An excellent analogy. One is a spike, the other is a new, higher baseline of well-being.
Okay, so with that foundation, let's start at the ground level of this framework. Tier 1, sensual joy and happiness. That's Sāmisa Pīti, and Sāmisa.
Exactly. And to define this, the Buddha outlines what he calls the 5 strands of sensual pleasure, the kamaguna. This is basically everything that drives our modern consumer economy. It's our standard definition of the good life.
And these are tied directly to our 5 senses, right?
Directly. The 5 sense objects they depend upon are forms, or rupa, that you perceive through your eyes. Sounds, sade, through the ears.
Smells, gandha, through the nose. Tastes, rasa, through the tongue.
And finally, touches, vokabha, through the body. It's the entire sensory buffet of human experience. Anything and everything you can experience through your senses falls into this category.
And the sources are, from what I remember, incredibly vivid in detailing why this kind of pleasure, even when it's really intense, is fundamentally flawed.
They are. The text makes it clear that these experiences are pleasing iti. They're delightful, kanta, and lovable, piyarupa. They feel good. There's no denying that.
No one is saying a beautiful sunset or a great meal isn't enjoyable.
Of course not. But the key to the whole sutta, the real insight, lies in 2 very specific, critical descriptive phrases that follow. He says these pleasures are kamopasahita and rajanya.
Okay, we have to spend some time on those 2 terms, because they feel like the spiritual translation of the modern neurochemical addiction cycle we were talking about. So what exactly does the text mean by kamopasahita?
Kamopasahita means they are stimulating sensual craving. This is the core of it. They aren't just enjoyable in a single isolated moment. They actively reinforce the desire loop.
So the experience itself plants a seed for wanting more of it.
Instantly, the moment you experience one of these pleasures, the mind conditions itself to want the repetition of that experience or even an escalation of it. The joy is not self-contained. It's a self-propagating loop.
Which is the bait we talked about. And then there's the second term, rajanya. Does that just mean it creates excitement?
It's more than just excitement. It means it creates excitement and attachment. The word literally means something like coloring or staining the mind.
Coloring the mind.
Yes. The moment you enjoy that beautiful sight, that incredible sound, that delicious taste, the brain immediately tags it. It applies this powerful emotional stain that says, this is good, this is mine, I need this again.
And that stain, that attachment.
That is craving. That's rajanya. This complete dependence on an external stimulus and the resulting desire loop is the very definition of Sāmisa joy.
This implies that the joy isn't just gone when the stimulus stops. It actually leaves a debt, a kind of negative residue, which we then feel as that craving or the crash.
It's the neurological equivalent of a neurochemical hangover after the dopamine hit. You're exactly right.
It's unstable.
Incredibly unstable. And the source material uses a famous, really powerful example to illustrate this. The story of Ambapali.
The famous courtesan, right?
Yes. She was, by all accounts, perhaps the most beautiful woman of her time. She represented the absolute peak of rupa form-based sensual pleasure, the very pinnacle of what Sāmisa joy could offer.
The best of the best.
And yet, when the Buddha saw her years later, she was old, infirm, her body was withered, and her famous beauty was completely dissolved. The text uses her story as this ultimate visceral example of why Sāmisa pleasure, even at its absolute peak, always carries the seed of its own inevitable decay.
Because the external source is impermanent. The moment the sound stops, the taste is finished, the beauty fades. The joy and happiness just dissolve.
And they leave behind that residue of craving and disappointment. And that residue, that feeling of what's next, that is the definition of suffering, or dukkha. It's a foundation built on shifting sand.
Which leads anyone who sees this clearly to look for a better foundation.
This realization that external dependence is fundamentally flawed is what drives a practitioner to the second tier, Nirāmisa.
Which means non-sensual, divorce from external stimulus.
We're moving into the realm of internal practice now, the realm of the jhanas.
And this is a critical psychological and, as we'll see, a neurochemical break. The text says this joy and happiness arise when a practitioner secludes themselves from sensual pleasures, viviccheva kamehi.
And from unwholesome states, vivekkhā akusalahi dhamehi.
So they aren't just closing their eyes and ears, they're actively withdrawing from those 5 strands of sensual pleasure, and at the same time, purifying the mind of things like greed, hatred, and delusion.
And the joy that results from that process is entirely internal. It's self-generated and self-sustaining.
So let's walk through the progression here, through the jhanas, because the quality of this joy and happiness seems to purify and stabilize in a very systematic way.
It does. It's a refinement process. Mm-hmm. In the first jhana, the joy, pīti, and happiness, Sukha, are born from that seclusion, Vimokkha. The mind isn't totally silent yet, it's still active. It has applied thought, savitakka, and sustained thought, savikkata.
So you're still thinking, but you're focused.
Exactly. You're typically contemplating the meditative object, like the breath. But even with that bit of mental activity, the joy that arises it's exhilarating. It's the relief of finding silence after a lifetime of noise. It's this thrilling discovery that, wow, profound pleasure is possible just by sitting here.
Which aligns perfectly with that definition of Pīti rapture. It's an exciting discovery.
It is. But that rapture, that excitement, is still a bit coarse. It has an energy to it that can be distracting. And that's why the practice moves on to the second jhāna.
Okay, so what happens there?
The thinking and reflection, the vitakka and vikara, they subside. They calm down, vipassana. The mind becomes deeply unified, shataso ekudipava. It's no longer being directed, it's just settled.
And the joy and happiness here, they come from a different source now.
Yes. Now they arise solely from deep, stable concentration, samadhijā. This makes the joy inherently purer and more stable than the joy that came just from the effort of seclusion. It's less agitated, more refined.
And this is where that distinction we made earlier between Pīti and Sukha becomes really critical, especially as we move into the third jhāna. The nature of the experience shifts again, doesn't it?
Radically. The source notes that in the third jhāna, the joy, the Pīti, it fades away. Viraga?
So the excitement is gone, the thrill, the turbulence, that bubbly feeling, it's all gone.
All gone. And what remains is a profound, steady, all-pervading happiness. The Sukha.
The third jhāna really feels like the critical pivot point in this whole process.
It absolutely is. Think back to our race analogy. The Pīti of the first two jhanas is like the exhilarating but bumpy ride up the mountain. The Sukha of the third jhana is the profound relief and contentment of reaching the summit and sitting down by a warm, steady fire after a long, hard journey.
So that high excitation of Pīti is now actually seen as a subtle disturbance, an obstacle to a deeper peace.
Precisely. So the practitioner in the third jhana abides in this deep equanimity, Upekkhā, experiencing happiness with the body, Sukhanika kayana paisavadeti. It's not excitement anymore, it's stable, deep contentment. The text says the noble ones describe this as being equanimous, mindful, dwelling in happiness.
And this Nirāmisasutta, this non-sensual happiness, is just vastly superior to the first tier.
Worlds apart. It's entirely independent of external factors, and is actively leading the practitioner toward detachment and true inner peace. The mind had learned to generate its own stable neurochemical environment, completely bypassing the need for any of those Sāmisa pleasures.
Okay, so if the meditative state is the second tier, what could possibly be higher than that? This is the third tier, the most refined joy and happiness. Nirāmisa, Nirāmisasutta.
The unconditioned state.
This is what it's all about then, ultimate freedom.
This is the joy of complete and total liberation. It's the state achieved by an arahant, a kisava one, who has permanently destroyed the taints, the asavas. This is the pinnacle.
And the source of this ultimate joy is unique, you said. It's not from an external thing, but it's also not from being in a deep meditative state.
Right. It doesn't depend on maintaining a specific concentration state like jhana.
So the meditator doesn't need to be sitting on a cushion in a deep absorption state to feel this.
Absolutely not. This is the amazing part. The ultimate joy arises when the enlightened being simply reflects on the liberation of their own mind from the three core defilements: lust, or raga, hatred, dosa, and delusion, moha.
So it's the relief of knowing you're free.
It's the profound, active, ongoing relief of recognizing that which caused me all my suffering for countless lifetimes. It is permanently gone.
That distinction is so key. The meditative joy, the Nirāmisa Pīti and Sukha, it's superior to sensual joy, but it is still conditioned, isn't it? It depends on the effort and the maintenance of that jhana state. If you stop concentrating, you eventually fall out of it.
But the arahant's joy is unconditioned. It's permanent. It's unshakable. Why? Because the structural cause of suffering, the defilements themselves, has been permanently uprooted and removed from the mind.
It's like having permanently deleted the operating system of desire.
A perfect way to put it. It's the joy of complete freedom, an irreversible fact of the mind's liberation. It's the highest possible state because nothing can ever bind that mind again. That is Nibbana. And this permanent neurological restructuring is what we need to connect to modern science in a bit.
Before we jump into the brain scans and neurochemistry, let's just quickly solidify this whole structure. I want to see how this three-tiered framework, sensual, non-sensual, and most refined non-sensual, also applies to equanimity, Upekkhā, and liberation, Vimokkha.
Yes, doing this shows just how systematic and comprehensive the teaching is. It addresses not just the highs and lows, but the mind's stability and its ultimate destiny. The transformation has to cover the full spectrum of mental states.
From feeling good to feeling nothing, to being perfectly balanced.
And finally, to being unconditionally free.
Okay, let's start with equanimity, Upekkhā. We tend to think of equanimity as this great virtue, but the sutta shows that even indifference can be flawed. Tier 1 is sensual equanimity, Sāmisa Upekkhā. This just sounds like not caring about what's happening around you.
And that's exactly what it is. It's passive indifference. A person might maintain some neutrality toward a minor irritating sound, like a dripping faucet, or a pleasant sight that they've seen 1,000 times.
So it's just being numb or bored.
Essentially. The source notes that this kind of equanimity is still worldly and completely unstable. It's not cultivated wisdom, it's just a lack of reaction. If that stimulus becomes strong enough, a severe pain, or an incredibly intense temptation, that flimsy indifference just collapses instantly into desire or aversion.
It's a temporary truce with your senses, not a victory over them.
Precisely. Which brings us to the deep internal stability of the second tier, non-sensual equanimity, Nirāmisa Upekkhā. This is the state achieved in the fourth jhāna.
And this is a radical shift.
A completely different animal. In the fourth jhāna, the practitioner has abandoned both pleasure, Sukha, and pain, Dukkha. The emotional highs, Somanasa, and the lows, Domanasa, have completely faded away. This is the state of Sukha.
Beyond happiness and suffering.
It's a state of utterly purified equanimity and mindfulness, Upekkhā. This is profound mental balance arising purely from deep concentration, completely independent of all internal or external feelings.
So it's an active, powerful stability, not just passive avoidance.
Exactly. And following the pattern, the highest equanimity, Nirāmisasutta Upekkhā, again belongs to the Arahant.
And this one doesn't require the concentration of the fourth jhāna.
Correct. It's the ultimate unshakable mental balance. It arises from the permanent destruction of lust, hatred, and delusion. Since the very roots of emotional reaction are gone, the fuel for the fire has been removed, the mind just remains perfectly balanced and even-keeled, no matter what the external or internal conditions are. It's a permanent, undisturbed state of being.
Okay, finally, let's apply this structure to liberation itself, Vimokkha. This feels essential because it highlights the limitations of achieving just temporary freedom or even really high mystical states. Sāmisa Vimokkha is sensual liberation. What does that even mean?
This is liberation that is still tied to rupa, or material existence. It refers to a temporary freedom that you might achieve through good deeds or merit.
Like getting a good rebirth.
Exactly. Attaining a rebirth in a celestial realm, or even achieving meditative attainments within the form realm. While those states are incredibly pleasurable and can last for a very, very long time, they are not ultimate freedom. They're fundamentally conditioned. The energy that maintains that heavenly state will eventually run out, and that being will fall back into the cycle of suffering.
And even the next tier, Nirāmisa Vimokkha non-sensual liberation, is still conditioned, even though it's beyond the physical body.
Yes, this refers specifically to the formless meditative absorptions, the Upekkhānas, states like the base of infinite space, or infinite consciousness, or the base of nothingness.
These sound incredibly high.
They're incredibly high, subtle states of consciousness, beyond the perception of form or even time. However, because they are based on a meditative state that must be sustained, they are a conditioned energy. They are not ultimate. A being born in one of those formless realms will eventually run out of the conditioned energy that keeps them there and will be reborn again back into the cycle of suffering.
This really clarifies the sheer superiority of the highest state, the third tier, Nirāmisa Nirāmisasutta Vimokkha.
It does. This is the ultimate, unconditioned freedom of the Arahant. It arises from the mind being fully and permanently liberated from raga, dosa, and moha. It's not freedom from form or from sensuality. It is freedom from all defilements and all conditions.
It results in permanent, unshakable release.
That is Nibbana. And this final tier, this permanent structural change, is what we must now analyze through the lens of modern neuroscience.
Okay, this is the bridge. This is where we connect two millennia of thought. We have this incredibly detailed, three-tiered spiritual architecture. But how does this shift from a fleeting dopamine hit to unshakable serenity actually translate into brain chemistry and neural networks? What is physically happening in the brain when we achieve these states?
The shift from that Sāmisa external dependence to Nirāmisasutta unconditioned freedom is a measurable physical rewiring of the brain. The specific neurochemicals that are driving our experience explain perfectly why sensual joy is so unstable and why meditative joy is so stable.
All right, let's start with that first tier, the sensual state. When we're chasing those five strands of pleasure, the beautiful sight, the great song, the delicious taste, what neurochemicals are running the show, and why is that whole system inherently unsustainable?
That entire reward loop is dominated by one key player, the monoamine neurotransmitter dopamine,
Which everyone calls the pleasure chemical.
which is a bit of a misnomer, actually. Dopamine isn't the pleasure chemical itself, it is the motivational molecule. It's the wanting chemical. It's released in anticipation of a reward, and its job is to reinforce our habit loops and drive craving. It's the brain's mechanism that screams, do that again, but maybe do it harder or sooner.
And this neurochemical process feeds what the ancient text calls kamupasahita, stimulating craving, and rajanya, creating attachment. In modern terms, this is just the addiction and tolerance cycle. It's what scientists call hedonic adaptation.
Exactly. When you chase that Sāmisa pleasure, you're lighting up the reward pathways centered in a part of the brain called the nucleus accumbens. But here's the catch. Repeated activation causes the brain to protect itself by downregulating its dopamine receptors.
It's trying to get back to a baseline.
Right. And the result is that the brain's sensitivity to dopamine reduces over time. So you require stronger and stronger stimulus to achieve the same level of pleasure you got the first time. This is the dopamine treadmill. The joy is fleeting, and the residue it leaves behind is a heightened capacity for desire.
What about other chemicals? Is it all dopamine?
Oxytocin plays a secondary role here. It can strengthen our social or emotional attachments to people or places associated with a pleasure, but it doesn't stabilize the mind. The Sāmisa state is really defined by this high craving sensitivity driven by dopamine.
Okay, now let's contrast that sharply with the jhānic state, the Nirāmisa phase. This is where the chemistry has to shift systematically to create and sustain that internal stability.
And it's a decisive shift. We see a move towards serotonin dominance accompanied by endorphins.
So serotonin, what does that do for us?
Serotonin, or 5-HT, is associated with long-term contentment, mood stability, and reduced impulsivity. The profound happiness, the Sukha, that we talked about in the third jhana, arises from this internal stability. It effectively reduces your dependence on those external volatile dopamine hits. It's the neurochemical signature of everything is okay right now.
So if serotonin is contentment, what role do the endorphins play in the deep pleasure of jhāna?
This is key. Deep concentration activates endorphins, which are the body's natural opioids.
Like a runner's high, but for meditators.
A much more powerful and controllable version of that, yes. These induce a profound, pleasurable calm and act as a powerful natural analgesic, a painkiller. This mechanism is key to why the joy arising from deep concentration, the Samadhi joy, feels so superior and powerful. It's the body generating its own sustained internal high. This contributes to that sense of profound internal bliss and the relief from physical and mental pain described from the second jhana onward.
And then the ultimate state, the transcendental state of the arahant, the Nirāmisasutta. This seems less about an elevated high and more about achieving a perfect, non-reactive balance.
That is the critical distinction. It's about regulation, not reaction or a chemical spike. In the liberated mind, dopamine is still present. It facilitates motivation for skillful action, but it's no longer driven by craving. It's balanced, enabling mindful action without any attachment.
And serotonin.
Serotonin is optimized, providing a stable, lasting foundation of well-being. And critically, we see the activation of the endocannabinoid system.
That's the body's own Canada system, essentially.
In a way, yes. This system governs internal homeostasis, stress response, and pain regulation. It's associated with effortless relaxation and a deep sense of body-mind synchronization. The brain has literally achieved an unconditioned state of peace. This chemical signature explains the permanent, unshakable nature of this highest joy.
Okay, to really understand how meditation achieves this incredible balance, we have to talk about the physical, neural manifestation of the ego itself, the default mode network, or DMN. Let's define its components and its function, because it sounds like this network is literally the machine that creates our suffering.
That's not an exaggeration. The DMN is a large, highly interconnected network that involves three major hubs: the medial prefrontal cortex, or MPFC.
Which is right behind the forehead.
Yes. And posterior cingulate cortex, the PCC, and the inferior parietal lobule, or IPL. Functionally, this network governs all of our self-referential thinking.
The I and mind show.
The I and mind show, exactly. Autobiographical memory, ruminating about the past, projecting your identity into the future, analyzing what others think of you. Anytime your mind wanders, this is the network that's highly active.
In Buddhist terms, this network is a perfect match for a Sakkaya, the personality view. the illusion of a continuous, stable self that we feel we have to constantly protect and feed. The DMN is literally the part of the brain that creates the sense of me.
Absolutely. The DMN creates that persistent illusion of a solid self and reinforces our habitual thought patterns, which the tradition calls samskara, or karmic tendencies or formations.
And the source material is very clear that these patterns aren't just formed in this life. It suggests that the DMN's very structure is influenced by past karmic tendencies carried over from previous existences.
It's a huge claim.
Wait, that's a massive leap. You're connecting an ancient metaphysical idea of a continuous consciousness stream, the Pavaga Theta, to specific, measurable brain anatomy. Can we detail how neuroscience could hypothetically even begin to support this claim of karmic carryover?
Okay, the connection rests on the mechanism of neuroplasticity and habitual encoding, just applied across the concept of rebirth. Every single repeated thought strengthens neural pathways. That's a fundamental principle called Hebbian learning. Neurons that fire together, wire together.
And thoughts rooted in craving and aversion are some of the most repetitive thoughts we have.
They're incredibly strong, repeated thought processes. So if I spend this entire life indulging in sensual cravings, I'm physically wiring the DMN and the reward centers of my brain to be hyperactive.
You're carving deep grooves in your brain.
Exactly. The sources suggest that these strong past habits, which they call vasana or imprints, are encoded in these specific synaptic connection strengths. These patterns are held in the subconscious mental stream, the Havagacita.
And then at rebirth.
When that consciousness stream remanifests in a new body, the nascent, developing brain structure is influenced by these highly encoded patterns. It's like a blueprint.
So, if a child is born with an unusually hyperactive reward system or a predisposition toward anxiety, you're saying that isn't just genetic or purely environmental. It could be the DMN reconstructing itself based on the energetic imprints from a past life that was driven by strong craving or fear.
The architecture is predisposed to run those old loops. The DMN maintains the attachment to identity, which is what keeps the whole cycle of suffering, samsara, running.
So the goal of meditation, then, is literally to shut down the self-referential thought factory, to break the DMN's hold over our identity, and by doing that, break the link to craving what the texts call tancha nirodha. What are the mechanics of the suppression?
That is the core mechanism of liberation. Neuroscientific studies using fMRI and EEG show that meditative practices significantly reduce DMN activity.
Even basic mindfulness?
Even basic mindfulness. Practices like Vipassana, which focus on insight, decrease DMN activity and strengthen another area, the anterior cingulate cortex, or ACC.
And what does the ACC do?
The ACC is like the brain's conflict monitor and attentional regulator. Strengthening it allows the mind to regulate emotional responses and shift attention more effectively. This results in less self-referential thinking, which is the direct lived experience of anatta, or non-self.
But Jhāna seems to be the heavy hitter here. It's the tool for the raw suppression required to achieve that deep Nirāmisa bliss.
It is the deepest possible controlled suppression. While the sensual, wandering mind is operating at, say, 100% DMN activity, generating that constant ego-driven noise, and craving deep jhana practice causes highly focused DMN suppression. It drops activity down significantly. Some studies suggest it could go as low as 30% of baseline activity.
Wait, hold on. If the DMN is reduced to 30% in jhana, how does the meditator maintain conscious awareness? If that part of the brain is responsible for self-referential thought, what is that remaining 30% actually doing?
That's a fantastic question. That residual 30% is crucial. In deep absorption, that remaining activity is not being used for rumination or creating a self-narrative.
Yeah.
Instead, it's hypothesized to be maintaining a kind of peripheral awareness and regulatory function.
So it's keeping the lights on.
It's keeping the lights on and keeping the mind stable. It keeps the meditator focused on the deep internal object, like the nimitta or sign of concentration, and allows them to remain aware and in control rather than getting lost in some kind of unconscious trance. This profound, controlled suppression leads to that experience of selflessness, deep absorption, and mental stillness, non-duality and bliss.
And this directly addresses the elimination of sensuality. If the DMN is the part of the brain that generates the I, that does the craving, then shutting down the DMN breaks the entire attachment system.
It dismantles it structurally.
Yeah.
And for the fully liberated being, the arhat who has achieved that Nirāmisasutta state, DMN activation approaches near zero. We're talking maybe 5%. At that level, the mind no longer possesses the neurological infrastructure to generate mental suffering rooted in ego-centered processing. And crucially, the sources emphasize neuroplasticity. Sustained, controlled meditation accelerates long-term neural stability. It permanently rewires the brain away from short-term pleasure-seeking and toward inner joy. It is an irreversible upgrade to the operating system.
This systematic, controlled rewiring is the key feature then. And we have to analyze this against other methods people use today to seek profound bliss and ego dissolution. I'm talking about psychedelics and also practices rooted in intense breath work, like Kriya Yoga, or things promoted by groups like Inner Engineering.
This comparison is vital because it distinguishes between a temporary peak experience, which we can classify as a very high Sāmisa state or temporary Nirāmisa state, and the permanent controlled mastery that leads to Nirāmisasutta. The critical difference is the role of will and the stability of the insight.
Okay, let's start with the big one, psychedelics. Things like psilocybin, LSD, DMT. They are known to induce these states of profound unity and ego dissolution. And the science confirms they do this by suppressing the DMN, sometimes up to 90%, which is even deeper than a meditator might initially achieve.
That is confirmed through fMRI studies, yes. They act as a kind of shortcut. They temporarily mimic deep meditative states by causing an intense, massive spike in serotonin, specifically by stimulating the 5-HT2A receptors. This also increases connectivity across disparate brain regions that don't normally talk to each other.
And the result is a loosening of ego boundaries.
A radical loosening. It gives the user an experience of anathan non-self or profound cosmic unity and bliss. If you look at a brain scan, the patterns can look almost identical to deep meditation.
The source analysis suggests they are ultimately inferior to Jhāna for achieving permanent liberation. Why is that? If the DMN suppression is even higher, aren't they more effective?
The primary limitations are stability, control, and the cultivation of wisdom. A 90% DMN drop isn't just a quiet mind. It can be a radical, disorienting, and completely uncontrollable loss of your internal geography. The experience is dose-dependent, it requires an external substance, and it lacks repeatability or control. You can't just choose when to enter or exit that state.
Whereas the meditator, through sustained disciplined effort, is generating that state through internal mastery.
Oh, precisely. Jhāna requires both samadhi, concentration, and panya, wisdom. Psychedelics can provide a powerful temporary experience of DMN silence. They can show you the potential for selflessness, but they do not, by themselves, guarantee permanent wisdom or eliminate the deep roots of craving and ignorance.
They show you the destination on a map, but they don't teach you how to drive the car to get there yourself.
That's a great way of putting it. They don't teach the mind how to maintain that structure through conscious effort when the chemical stimulus is gone. So they can offer short-term neuroplasticity, a chance to break old patterns. But they don't create the deep, stable, long-term emotional resilience that is achieved by sustained, systematic jhana practice.
The mind often just reintegrates the ego afterward, still possessing its original propensity for craving and aversion.
Correct. For that liberated state, the Nirāmisasutta, the mind has to learn to generate that equanimity effortlessly and perpetually. That requires the deep structural change achieved through conscious, volitional practice, not through temporary external neurochemical intervention.
Okay, what about practices that rely more on physiological control? These intensive techniques that use breath and energy, like Kriya Yoga, often taught in different schools like Inner Engineering or other spiritual lineages. These also promise bliss, high states of consciousness, and an expanded self-identity.
Kriya Yoga focuses intensely on rhythmic breathwork, pranayama, and often a mantra, like Soham, which means I am that. The goal is to activate subtle energy, prana, and achieve an expanded cosmic self-identity. And they certainly produce strong euphoric bliss and elevated states of consciousness. We would classify this as a high-level but effort-dependent Nirāmisa state.
So how does this intense physiological approach affect the DMN compared to the stillness-based approach of Buddhist jhana?
This is the key difference. The DMN is only partially suppressed in these kinds of practices. And the difference comes from the philosophical goal and the resulting type of self-perception change. While the Kriya practitioner might experience their ego expanding into a cosmic identity, that I am that realization, the sense of self is still very much present.
It's just bigger now.
It's bigger. The sense of self remains tied to body energy, to breath synchronization. It's still there, just expanded.
So if we use a water analogy, a practice like Kriya Yoga takes your small, individual drop of ego and expands it to believe it is the entire cosmic ocean. But it's still a drop with boundaries, and it's tethered to the physical process of breathing.
That is an excellent way to put it. It achieves an incredibly elevated state of consciousness, but not the complete extinction of the self-view, not anatta. The bliss generated is effort-dependent. If you stop the intense breath control, the state diminishes.
So even though it feels incredibly high and pure, it remains within conditioned existence, within samsara.
Precisely. The ultimate goal of such practices often leads to rebirth in higher realms or a higher state of consciousness, a form of Sāmisa Vimokkha or a temporary Nirāmisa Vimokkha. But it still falls short of the permanent unconditioned freedom of Nibbana.
Whereas Buddha's Jhāna,
In contrast, leads to complete DMN suppression relative to the ego structure. Its goal is the full extinction of identity and entity in a self-sustaining bliss that becomes independent of breath or any other effort. The ultimate goal is dissolution, not expansion.
let's just briefly place a few other popular altered states on this spectrum, just to clarify where Jhāna stands in comparison to more everyday experiences of bliss.
Good idea. We can start with something like mantra recitation or deep prayer. These certainly offer tangible emotional benefits.
Right. They can provide a moderate serotonin and oxytocin boost, which leads to emotional stability and peace. But often, DMN activity remains moderate because the practice usually creates a strong spiritual self-identity. The I who is praying, the devout self. This self-identity is still being run by the DMN.
Similarly, let's look at flow states. That state of peak performance you might get in sports or creative work.
Being in the zone.
Exactly. That involves moderate DMN suppression and a dopamine surge. You experience self-forgetfulness and emotional elevation, but they happen unpredictably, they're inherently short-lived, and they're always tied to a specific external activity that's generating results.
And what about something like hypnosis?
Hypnosis induces a trance-like state where the self softens and becomes more suggestible. This can allow access to deeper subconscious patterns. But DMN suppression is low compared to jhana, and the effects are temporary, requiring external guidance or suggestion. It lacks that internal control mechanism.
The verdict seems pretty clear then. Jhāna is unique because it's the only method presented that achieves that extreme, stable bliss, the Nirāmisa state, and maximum controlled DMN suppression with full conscious awareness and control.
And that combination is what results in the permanent, fundamental neurological rewiring required to transition to the unconditioned state.
That's the critical takeaway. Jhāna is a systematic technology that was designed for ultimate liberation. The others are temporary peaks or partial solutions or conditioned states that do not permanently dismantle the DMN, the very source of our craving and our suffering.
This has been a deeply insightful experience. I mean, the central insight we've really uncovered here is this radical difference between chasing sensual pleasure on one hand,
Which is all driven by dopamine and requires DMN activation to reinforce that self-craving loop.
and cultivating freedom on the other, which is driven by optimized serotonin and endorphins and requires disciplined, controlled DMN suppression.
We've established that to truly eliminate suffering and sensual craving, to make that leap from the dependency of Sāmisa to the freedom of Nirāmisasutta, the target has to be the self-referential default mode network.
And external highs, like psychedelics, or practices that retain a subtle, elevated identity, like those cosmic expansion techniques, they only offer temporary relief or conditioned states.
The Nirāmisasutta and its neuroscientific translation show us that jhana provides the systematic, repeatable, and permanent neurological restructuring required for true liberation for Nirāmisa, Nirāmisatara, Vimokkha. It's a technology for irreversible change.
And we learned that the DMN is essentially the karmic continuity carrier, physically shaped by our habitual thought patterns, which are carried across existences. So tonight we want to leave you with this to think about. What is the single most dominant self-referential thought loop running in your head right now?
A core craving, an ingrained fear, a habitual piece of your self-narrative.
That loop isn't just a mental habit. It is physically wiring your brain for your next moment of suffering. Can you choose to starve that one specific neurological pattern today, and by doing so, fundamentally alter the architecture of yourself? Start unwiring the self now.